So in North America, we have a very I, me, accomplishment, performance sort of idea of happiness. But if we jump across the pond into like China or Japan, you see things more like a collectivist. It's community, it's us, it's we, it's responsibility to those around me. The more lonely you feel, the less likely you are to reach out to connect. A lot of people there appreciate what they have. And in North America, we don't seem to see that. It's always want more, bigger, better, shinier, brighter.
Are a lot of us hyper-focused on like, am I happy? Am I happy? Am I happy? And is that interfering with us actually being happy? Hello and welcome to another episode of Dating Beyond Borders podcast. Today, I'm excited to have Dr. Gillian Mandich with us. She's a published researcher, a two-time TEDx speaker, and the founder of the International Happiness Institute of Health Science Research. Gillian is also a regular on TV sharing her expertise on happiness. In today's episode, we're diving deep into all things happiness, from the happiest countries around the world and what we can learn from them, to whether moving abroad can actually make you happier, and if it's possible to be truly content on your own without a relationship. Welcome, Gillian.
Thank you. I am so happy to be here and having this conversation with you today.
Well, I'm excited that the happiness researcher is happy to be on this podcast.
Things are off to a happy start.
Okay, so Gillian, we're going to dive deep into it. So do you believe that there is a rise of unhappiness nowadays?
This is a big question right out of the gate. We are seeing, so there's two pieces to it, the measurement piece, right? But also when we look at levels specifically, actually, I did a talk last year. The United Nations has a university in Costa Rica called the University for Peace. And last year I did a talk on Gen Z and mental health. And I was looking across the board at a variety of different data from all around the world. So not just North American data, but from across all the different regions of the world. And what we see is sort of, if you look at rates of, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, they sort of have a slight increase. And then with Gen Z, the most recent ones, is a huge increase. So you're seeing the slope of the line change significantly. I do think that one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that it brought the mental health conversation to the forefront. But at the same time, I think because of that, we are having a lot more conversations and we are seeing it. And we're living in a really hard world right now and it's hard to cope. And so it makes sense that we're seeing all this struggle and people challenging because it is a hard and challenging time.
What do you think is the most challenging part? Why do you think unhappiness has surged so much?
Well, the first thing is like, did you learn how to be happy in school? Were you taught how to be happy?
No, not at all.
Me neither. And so part of it is that if we were never taught what happiness actually is, what we can do to cultivate it in our life, we don't know. So no wonder we're struggling. And I think that's where the science of happiness really comes in, and why I think that a lot of important and exciting work is being done in this space is because we learn about, all sorts of different things. Like you learn how to, when you're growing up, you learn how to, cook, learn how to do laundry, you learn how to do these things to function as an adult in the world, but you don't learn how to be happy. We weren't taught. And so I think that what we're seeing is the emergence in an interest in it, especially from a scientific perspective, because a lot of times when I tell people I study happiness, they kind of like look at me like I had two heads and they get confused, right? Because it's a fairly new field and it's not that common. But just like we can learn about, use science to learn about, diabetes or cardiovascular disease or anything, we can use scientific principles to learn what happiness is and how do we actually cultivate and grow more of that in our life. And so I think it's an exciting time, but it's definitely something that we are sort of in terms of like the science of it, still very much in its infancy stage, right? We're just learning. But it's time, right? It's long overdue. There's been such a focus on mental illness, right? And there's a big distinction between mental illness, which is, someone that's experiencing depression or schizophrenia, things like that, and mental health. Mental health is a different conversation than mental illness. Mental health is, how do we live our best life ever? How can I cultivate more health in terms of my thoughts, my actions, and my habits in my life.
So when you look at these statistics, do you find that there are certain countries that really jump out in terms of unhappiness? I mean, just in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, because I looked a lot at, let's say, Sweden, but even I can say that Canada, in a way, I would I would assume there are more unhappy people there. And just in my mind, thinking of the fact that so many of us are isolated and we have more social media friends than we do actual people, right? Because I think then when they asked Gen Z, they asked how many people do you have? Who can you call when you're in times of need? And they were like 0 to 2 people, whereas like they did those studies before, and it was quite a lot more friends that we had because I feel like people are just after COVID, especially, we've learned to isolate ourselves, and maybe it's harder for us to now socialize, especially like the younger people. And maybe there's less of a need for us to socialize because we feel like we're getting that fix from social media, from TV, from games. So we could just sit at home, pretend that we're actually connecting with people. But in the end, we're all isolated. So that's my personal spin on it. But I want to hear your side of it. If you've noticed any countries jumping out at you in terms of unhappiness.
Yeah, there's a lot here to unpack. I love that you're bringing this up. So let's start with the country part. So every year, so March 20th is the International Day of Happiness. So every year on March 20th, the World Health Organization releases a happiness report. And part of that report is what they do is they rank all the countries in the world in terms of their happiness. And so what we see, like, and you were correct, fighting for the top all the time are the Scandinavian countries. So Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, they're always fighting at the top. Canada is ahead of the US, but not by much. Costa Rica actually broke the top 10 last year, which I think is interesting because oftentimes we think that the more affluent countries will be at the top, but we're not seeing that as a pattern across the board. So we are seeing absolutely that there is variation in happiness globally. We also see that like people value happiness differently in different parts of the world. So in North America, we have a very I, me, accomplishment, performance sort of idea of happiness. But if we jump across the pond into like China or Japan, you see things more like a collectivist. It's community, it's us, it's we, it's responsibility to those around me. So there's variations culturally in terms of even how we experience and interpret happiness. What I think is really interesting is that when we look at ranking the countries across the globe, though, we are seeing loneliness as a challenge. And this is particularly problematic because what we do know is that social connection, the number one predictor of both our long-term health and our happiness, is social connection. So above how much money we have, above where we live, our race, our age, our gender, any education, whatever it is, the idea of having connection is the most important thing. And this is good data. We've seen a ton of data coming out about this, but one of the big ones, the longest running happiness study in the world is still underway. It's been going on for about 80 years now at Harvard, and it's called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. And what researchers did was they tracked two different groups of men. One was a group of undergraduate students at Western, that's my school, at Harvard. And the other one was a low socioeconomic area in Boston. And it actually started as two separate studies, but they've merged them now and they've followed these men. And the reason you might be wondering why only men, because back then only men participated in research. So that's how far back we're going. But the good news is what researchers have done is have now added in partners and children of the people in the study. So we are getting a better picture. And the current lead investigator of that study, his name is Dr. Robert Waldinger. And he wrote a really good book that came out last year called The Good Life. And I'm not ruining this book for any of you, but the punchline is that the good life is built on good connections and social connection. And when we see sort of the opposite of that, right? So disconnection, feeling lonely, it can be as detrimental to our physical health as smoking or obesity. So we see physical implications when we don't feel connection. Now, you might be listening, okay, well, what does connection mean, right? That's a fair question. And it's not about having 5,000 Facebook friends or anything like that. Often the question that researchers will ask, and you sort of touched on this earlier, is if you were having crisis or something in the middle of the night, do you have someone that you can call, right? Is there someone that if you were in a crisis or were having a hard time or whatever, they call you? The key here, though, is it has to have a reciprocity. We all kind of have some of those friends, right? Where, you listen to them and they don't, it's a one-way street, right? That doesn't count because that's more like a therapy session than an actual human connection that goes collaboratively both ways. And it's so important, right? We as humans are hardwired for connection. And like you said, it gets even more complicated because now we can kind of get like if you think about human connection as like nourishment, like eating a really healthy meal, right? You get social media connection. That's kind of like eating junk food, right? You get a little bit, you're not hungry anymore, but it just doesn't deeply nourish your body in the same way. But it creates this false feeling of connection sometimes, right? And so that can be a really slippery slope because we are now taking the virtual world and trying to have that be in our real world. And it just doesn't work.
Mm. And so I can imagine that that's a big reason why you'd mentioned that a lot of the Gen Zs, they have classified themselves as unhappy, or the unhappiness levels have gone up. And you mentioned it was drastically in the last since COVID or before that.
That entire generation, if you look at rates of anxiety, reported anxiety, rates of depression, of suicidal ideation, the rates are skyrocketing for Gen Z. And part of it, you think about it, when you're young and then all of a sudden you're told to stay at home and have no connection during formative times, we start to lose our social skills. Like I even myself, I remember because when things started opening up after the pandemic, I'm highly extroverted. I love meeting new people. I love striking up conversations with strangers at the airport. Like I love that. And I remember even me struggling at first to try to remember what it's like to talk to somebody you don't know. And it's a skill, right? And when you don't practice that skill, when you don't have to have that face-to-face interaction, and even sometimes face-to-face interaction when it's a camera or you're talking but your camera's off, right? It's not the same. And when your life has so much of that built into it now, right? With all this remote work and, doing school from home and all of these things, we start to lose the skill of being able to relate to someone human to human.
And I can imagine, if you're growing up in a country and in the time nowadays, you're not taught socialization as a kid. You're not taught to play outside with other kids and to fight and to make up. Then it becomes so much harder for you to then socialize in adult life. And in a way, I don't know how you feel about it, Gillian, but like after COVID, I talked to a few people and they said, you know what, like as much as we missed socializing, we got so used to kind of spending that time on our own and entertaining ourselves that we no longer need it as much, which is the other scary thing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And I've heard that a lot as well. I think there's a fine line. For myself, I think when I'm reflecting on sort of going through the pandemic, one of the things that I did a lot was jigsaw puzzles. I love listening to podcasts and doing jigsaw puzzles. And so once things started opening up again, I stopped doing that because I started going out again. And I realized that no, there's a time and a place for both. Some Friday nights or Saturday nights, it's nice to stay home with a puzzle and a podcast, but not every day. And so I think that sometimes it's about asking ourselves, is this a crutch because we should be doing something else? Or is this, self-care or really taking care of yourself? And it's a fine line. The other piece is what's habit and comfort and familiar versus what's best for you. Because one of the other things that we do know, which is very counterintuitive about loneliness, is the more lonely you feel, the less likely you are to reach out to connect. So you would think that if you're feeling lonely, you would reach out, but it actually doesn't work. It goes the exact opposite way. So we also have to be aware of that because most of the times when we're feeling lonely, if we're sitting around waiting for a feeling to come that's going to urge us to take out our phone and text or call someone, it's probably not going to come. We have to force ourselves to do it anyway, because that is a time when we just don't feel like it. And there's a level of honesty that we have to have for ourselves, knowing the data shows that when we feel lonely, we're less likely to reach out for connection.
Is there a reason why that is?
That's a good question. I've never been asked that. Let me think about that. I think that this is my guess. Part of it is that when you feel lonely, you start to isolate yourself, right? And you start to go in and you can start to feel alone, right? And if you're feeling down, I can see a world in which you and your friends are doing something. You look on social media and you see their big, polished, curated feed and you're not feeling great. Maybe you don't want to talk to them because you feel like, oh, I'm going to be a downer, or I'm going to bring them down or something like that, even though we know that everything that people post on social media is a curated feed. It's not real life. But when you are feeling lonely, sometimes, like if you think of your mental health like a battery, it's almost like your battery's feeling low, right? Or it's like, if you've had a day when you had an amazing sleep and you wake up in the morning and just like everything seems nicer, everything seems like such a great thing. Or you have a day where, like, there's a couple weeks ago, the fire alarm kept going off on and off for hours in the middle of the night in my condo building. So the next morning I wake up and I was just like, I noticed I was a little bit more on edge, and I was a little bit like snippy when my emails, I had to like stop because I was just grumpy. And so when you're in those states, you're not operating from the highest and greatest mental version of you. And so sometimes logic might not be the thing that comes into place because you're just not at your capacity. You're not at your highest and greatest. And so that's when we have to know, okay, I know I don't feel like connecting, but I know that that's going to be better for me. So do it anyway. Sometimes we just do things not because we feel like it, but because we know in the end it's better for us. And then after we actually do it, after you go and have coffee with a friend or talk to someone on the phone, you always feel better, right? So you can check in and remind yourself of that data. But just at the beginning, it often doesn't feel that way.
Hey everyone, just a quick note to say that while I love putting these podcasts together each week, they do take a ton of time and effort. So if you're enjoying the show, please make sure to follow on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you're tuning in, and give this podcast a 5-star rating to help it grow. This support really helps me keep improving the show's quality. Thank you, and back to the episode. Yeah, that's a great point. It kind of reminds me of, when you're trying to go to the gym and you're trying to get to the point where you're motivated enough to go to the gym, but it just never comes because you haven't gone to the gym for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So at some point, like you said, you have to just do it without any motivation. And then once you go, you're going to notice how much better you feel. And then you're going to want to do it more. I think it's the same thing with socialization. It's like, oh, but I'm not motivated. I just don't really feel like it. There's a Netflix show on. I'm going to watch White Lotus tonight, And so you get kind of stuck in that. And then you think, do I really need those people? Is it really like, do I really want that? And so at some point you have to just, because once you're around people, you feel differently and you like that feeling and then you want more of it. And maybe we do get used to being comfortable in our loneliness, right? And it almost becomes like the new normality, and it's harder to get ourselves out there. Now, a question for you. So you've talked about those connections that we make that are really important for our well-being, and I really love that. And do you feel that then being single is detrimental to our happiness?
Great question. I will answer it, but first, a quick backstory. So I didn't know you could study happiness until the second year of my PhD. So up until then, I was in health science, and I was researching childhood obesity. And when I learned that studying happiness was like a thing and you could do it, I thought, I want to study this, and I thought, I don't like feeling sad and anxious. And so why don't I switch my PhD topic, start studying happiness, and figure out how to be happy all the time? Like, that was my goal as this like naive grad student. And like we talked about, you can't be happy all the time, but I didn't know that at the time because I didn't know anything about happiness. And so when you start studying happiness, it forces you to really sit with yourself, right? Like, and ask yourself questions about your own happiness. So I would ask myself, like, Gillian, are you as happy as you think you could be? And what in your life makes you happy? And what is deterring from your happiness? And so one of the things that I did was I got divorced. So I was married for 5 years, a wonderful man. We were just not the right fit on very different paths. So then I had to navigate a breakup as a happiness researcher. So I had to sit there and think, okay, Gillian, like, what are the tools and strategies? Like, you talk about this stuff all the time, like rubber hits the road. What are you doing? So then, I was doing all the things, journaling, and I was actually really happy. And then I got in another relationship. That one was 4 years. And it was interesting because it was a very different relationship than my marriage. It was a lot more up and down versus my marriage was much more stable. So, and if you look at the data, what you see, and a lot of people think like, I really want to get married because once I put a ring on it, I'm going to live happily ever after, right? They have that thought. The data doesn't show that. What it is if you're happy before you get married, then the chances of you having a happy marriage are likely. If you are unhappy and you think that this marriage or the relationship is going to be the thing that makes you happy, it doesn't play out that way, because happiness starts as an internal thing. And if we look externally, whether it's to a partner or to money or a job or a title or whatever, we now are losing sight of our happiness because now we've put a contingent on something in the external world. Does the world impact and the environment impact our happiness? Yes, absolutely. But it's not about the relationship is going to make you more or less happy, being single more or less happy. It's about you as a person. And if you're in a relationship where you're both growing and you're thriving, can it enhance your happiness? Absolutely. But I mean, I know I've been in situations where it actually detracted from my happiness and it caused me more stress and more anxiety that I just had been peaceful. And, I've been single for a little while now and I've been really enjoying it because I've been enjoying a drama-free living experience. So it depends more on the relationships that you're in and can they be enhancing? Absolutely. Is it necessary to be with a partner to be happy? No. But if not, then you have to create those connections in other ways, right? With friends, with other people so that you have that social connection. But it's more nuanced, but definitely in a good, healthy, respectful, kind, loving, compassionate relationship, absolutely can enhance your happiness. But sometimes relationships aren't like that. And it can actually go the other way and be a drain on your happiness instead of enhancing it.
Yeah, I think you've raised such a great point because a lot of us we expect happiness to happen when we achieve something, when I get that job, when I find love, and we waste a lot of time waiting for that external thing to happen before we give ourselves permission to enjoy it. And it's something interesting because I think a lot about happiness. And there are those people, as cliche as it is, you can go somewhere to the poorest country and you see the happiest people, and they don't have anywhere the same amount of choice, the same amount of money, but somehow they are just happy people. Do you think some people are born being happy, or do they work at it? Or I know that's a really complicated question, but if you could somehow break it out.
So one of the world's leading happiness researchers, her name is Dr. Sonia Lyubomirsky. She's in California, and she wrote a book that came out, I don't know, it's over there, I can't see. I'm going to say like 10 years ago, but it could be plus or minus a couple of years from that. And the picture on the front of the book, it's called The How of Happiness, had a piece of like a pie with a piece missing. And sort of one of the big premises of the book was that there's sort of three main factors that impact our happiness. So genetics, our thoughts, our actions, and our habits, and our environment. And so the point in this book was that about 40% of our happiness is sort of things that we can control. So genetics play a role, about 50%, and then environment was 10, I believe. That kind of came under scrutiny because it just, to make something math so beautifully and simply, like it just doesn't really work. But I think the take-home message is that there are three main factors that influence our happiness. So genetics do play a role. So you can thank your parents or not, but it is a part of it. But the conversation doesn't end there. And I think that's the key piece to know, is that you do have some control. Environment also affects our happiness. And I think like living through lockdown, we all understand how environment can affect our mood, right? And then that third piece, which is our thoughts, our actions, and our habits. That's sort of, if we look at like, where is the lowest hanging fruit? What is the most amenable to change? That's where we focus. And so all of my work and all of my research has really focused on that, our thoughts, our actions, and our habits, because we live in our head every day and we control a lot of what we do for the most part. And what we know is when we focus on our thoughts, our actions, and our habits, not only can we increase our happiness short term, right? Like you get a boost, but when you start to build it as a habit over time, we can actually sustain our happiness at higher levels. When happiness research first began, they had this theory called set point theory. And the way that researchers thought happiness worked was that sort of like a thermometer in your room. So you have a set point of happiness that you're born with, and then something good happens and it goes up, and then slowly it goes down to baseline, or something bad or difficult or challenging happens, it goes down, and then you slowly kind of work your way up to your baseline again, right? So I'm in Toronto right now. and it's freezing outside. And so if I was to open my patio door, it would get really cold really quickly in here. And if I shut the door, eventually it would go back to whatever I have it set at right now. And so people with happiness, they thought that's how it worked too. But what we know now is that not only can we increase our happiness short term, right? Like in the moment, have something joy. Like I took my dog for a walk before this. Quick side note, I have a French bulldog who is snoring behind me. So if at any time in this audio you hear snoring, don't worry. I'm not putting myself to sleep. It's just my bulldog, Jocko. He'll be 4 in May. He's a great guy. So we now know that not only can we do things to boost our happiness short term, right? Like taking Jocko for a walk, but when we start to do those things over time, we can actually sort of grow our happiness almost like a muscle. So the way I explain it is sort of like, if you want to be fit and strong, you go into the gym and lift weights or do whatever exercise you want. Let's just say weightlifting for this example. So if you go into the gym and you do one bicep curl, you're probably not going to get much stronger, right? But if you consistently go in and do bicep curls over and over and over again, over time, your muscle gets stronger. And so what I think about happiness is, if you think about one little micro moment or one thing that you do to make you happy, walk your dog, enjoy a cup of coffee, talk to a friend, that's like one rep at the gym. Mm. And so if you continue to put in those reps, it's almost like your happiness muscle grows. So what you'll notice is you start to feel happier and you sustain it at higher levels. So if you think about it like a graph, it's sort of like over time, your happiness grows up. But the other really important piece of this conversation is that a happy life does not mean that hard things don't happen, that job losses don't happen, that divorces don't happen. A happy life means that as we start to cultivate the habit of happiness, put in the reps, increase our happiness, our highs get higher, but our lows, it's not like they go away. They just get higher too, because we are more resilient and better able to cope with hard things when they happen. And so that's sort of how I think about it is, you practice it and you learn for yourself, what are those things that make me happy? And some days, like we talked about, like when we're feeling lonely, you don't want to reach out. A lot of times, sometimes with happiness stuff too, it's like you may not feel like doing it, especially when it's cold out. Like the last thing I want to do is go walk my dog outside. But then when I come back in, I always feel better, right? So it's that same sort of counterintuitive thinking that sometimes we just have to say, no, I know this is good for me and I'm going to do it. And because if we sit there waiting for like inspiration or drive or motivation all the time, it just doesn't work that way, right? A lot of times we have to start doing these things and then we feel better in the end for doing it.
Yeah, I get like this when I've spent the whole day indoors. And because I work from home, I work remotely, which is wonderful, but it's also terrible for your mental health because you're essentially alone in front of the computer the entire day. You don't have any incentive to go anywhere, and you get so used to being at home, especially I'm also in Toronto in this terrible weather. So the one thing that helps me is, like you said, going for a walk or going to the gym, and then I just instantly feel better. What do you think is the number one thing or the number three things that people do that is very detrimental to their happiness levels?
One of them, I think this is a big, big one. Some research from Sean Aker and his wife, Michelle Gillian, they actually found that watching 3 minutes of news that you perceive to be negative in the morning, people had a 27% greater likelihood of reporting their day as unhappy 6 to 8 hours later. Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes we think we're just like mindlessly scrolling and then we put it away. But it doesn't work like that. The sort of the residue of that stays with us. And if we look at 2 big areas of opportunity to not be scrolling, it's first thing in the morning and right before bed. Mm-hmm. There's no need for us to check our phone first thing in the morning, right? Because what that does is it now takes you out of spending some time with yourself, and it's whatever else agenda, you have no control over what's coming up, what you're going to see, and taking that time for yourself in the morning. A big study actually just came out. I just did an interview with the Globe and Mail about it. This big study came out in the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, looking at our happiness throughout the day. And what the researchers found in the study was that our happiness is highest in the morning and it peaks. And so if we know our happiness is highest in the morning, then we don't want to do anything to detract from it because we know it's already probably going to go down the rest of the day. So we want to do all those things that can enhance it. So having that time in the morning, whether you have a morning routine or like, and just a quick note on that morning routine thing, I tend to extremes. And so when I first started reading this research and learning about morning routines, I thought that's a great idea because, your you're choosing to be intentional with how you start your day before the chaos of the day comes, right? But then I would hear, okay, Gillian, you need to do morning pages, which is like stream of consciousness. And then you need to meditate. And then you need to do, and the list my morning routine was becoming like an hour-long process. And I was like, this doesn't work for me. So what I do is I do something intentional in the morning. So it's different days. Like some days, if I'm feeling really stressed, maybe I need to do meditation. If I'm feeling really creative, maybe I need to get out markers and color for a bit, like just something in the morning. And so protecting that time, especially on social media and media, is big, big, big.
Yeah, you've raised a great point, and it's very interesting because I've noticed that as well. Because I'm not wonderful at waking up really early, but the times that I've had appointments or I just had to wake up very early. I've noticed that I'm much happier for some reason, and now it all makes sense because you said we're happiest in the morning. So you personally do not use social media in the morning, and if you don't, have you noticed that it's affected the way you that you basically are like your happiness levels essentially?
Yeah. And to be clear, I'm not perfect. There are mornings when I'll take my phone and scroll. Like it's a very human thing. And I know the data. It's hard. It's very hard. And sometimes some days you actually do need to check it. But sometimes like I'll notice, like unless like if I leave my phone in my bed, one of the things I've been trying to do is just not put my phone in my bedroom, because some mornings I'll just wake up and then I'll roll over to like innocently check the time or something like that. And then all of a sudden you're on Instagram and you're like, how did I get here?
It's true.
Right.
Yeah.
Or it's like, I live in a condo and I'll catch myself sometimes waiting for the elevator with Jocko after like taking him for a WALK. And, and I won't even have realized what I did. And I've taken my phone out of my pocket and I've opened it up and I've started to scroll like without me even like autopilot. Right. So it's not perfect. I'm not perfect. But what I do know is that on those mornings when I'm on that phone, I feel more stressed out. I don't have that like peace in the morning. Like when I start my morning slow and, I live by myself, so there's no one bothering me. I can do whatever I want. I can, read or journal or whatever. I'm working on a book right now, and taking that time without connecting right away, but connecting in with yourself. I know that on those days I'm better across the board. But it's hard and it's addicting, and a lot of it comes down to habits, right? Like don't put your phone in your room, Gillian. Just don't do it. And then I use that as an excuse. I need a clock. So I actually went and got a clock for like $5 on Amazon. Like that's like just the things that you make these excuses, but you have to be really honest with yourself. And then sometimes creating some of those environmental structures to help you when you go on autopilot and start opening up Instagram, scrolling without even realizing it.
Yeah, it is so funny too, right? I mean, we've all been guilty of it. I do exactly the same. I'll check something and then all of a sudden I'm on TikTok and I'm looking at someone's cancer diagnosis and I'm depressed because what if I have it, So, and then my whole day, I'm more stressed out, as you said. I also noticed that when I'm taking the subway, just everyone's on their phone constantly. And I've looked at some comments that people have left under videos and they say, it's really weird because I don't remember where the past 3 years have gone. And I think it's because we're not in mindful, right? We're not in the moment. We're constantly, as you said, we're waiting at the red light, phone out. It's not even something you think about. It's so subconscious at this level. If I have 2 seconds, I'm going to take my phone out because I don't want to be bored. Someone goes to the toilet, take your phone out,
Yeah.
So, and then you think, what's wrong with this? I mean, come on, I want to entertain myself for 2 seconds. Suddenly you've wasted 10 minutes, 20 minutes of your life. And so and I think that's the other thing is like, it's really hard to be happy if you're not present in the moment. And I think so many of us are either anxious or we're thinking about the past or we're thinking about the future or we're watching someone else live their better life. And so, yeah, I think that part of that really comes down to why so many of us are unfulfilled.
Yeah, you really bring up a great point about being present, right? Because if you look at stress and anxiety, it's often going back in the future to something that happened that you're replaying or something you're imagining happening in the future, right? But like even there's a dog park that close to where I live, and I'll go there and I'll walk by, and like a vast majority of the people their dogs are there playing, they're running around being cute, and they're staring at their phone. So here's a moment you're outside, your dog's there, easy to get some social interaction. Dogs do funny things at the dog park, and instead eyes glued to the phone. And so I really think that a really big piece of this is that presence and that awareness. And am I intentionally doing things, or am I moving mindlessly throughout my day? Because, I feel like some days you just blink and the day's over and you're like, where did that go? What happened today? Because you were just like rushing on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. And it's like, it's hard because if you're not paying attention, then you don't notice things. You don't find joy in the present moment. Like, I know that it sounds like, like a quote card or something that's put on like social media, but it's really a big piece of it is having that presence and that awareness and actually enjoying moments. There's actually a term, it's called savoring, SAVOURING. There's a U if you're Canadian. If you're listening in the States, there's no U. But savoring is essentially like the scientific term for stopping to smell the roses. So if you're drinking, like I have my coffee here, instead of just like drinking it, you like smell the coffee, you feel the mug, you enjoy the taste. And what that does and why that's really effective in terms of a happiness boosting exercise is that it brings you into the present moment and it allows you to fully experience the moment and be there for it. So part of the reason that is such a powerful practice for a lot of people, savoring whatever it is, like when you're out walking, even just like feeling the sun on your face, especially in the winter when it's cold here, it's just like, oh, and you feel like that warm sun, or just small little things to actually be present when you're eating your dinner instead of watching it while you're watching a show or something like that. Such a powerful practice to bring us into the moment and can be really, really happiness boosting.
I know you're a happiness expert, but trying to be happy in Toronto in the winter is an exercise.
Yep, I know. Yeah. So last week I was in Saskatchewan for a talk for the Saskatchewan Health Authority, and it was minus 40 degrees Celsius there. And I went to this talk and everyone was in a great mood. And I started thinking, okay, like if I'm sitting here in Toronto complaining, you're at minus 40, and they just like, they're used to it. One good thing, and this is what I tell myself, is that there's research that shows that people that live like in Toronto or in Canada, where we have different seasons that are very different, as opposed to like California or something where the climate's kind of the same all year long. Yes, our happiness dips in the winter in Canada. Or in people where it's cold, right? It definitely dips. But the amount of enjoyment we get out of our summer is greater because we appreciate it more because we don't have it all the time. And so we end up netting out more happiness, a net positive, compared to people that live in like California.
That is such a great point. I spent 6 months in Mexico in Playa del Carmen, and I really love to talk about this experience because you would think I would be deliriously happy. I mean, I was living on the beach, but people get used to things pretty fast,
Yes.
And I would wake up every day. I would see palm trees and beautiful, sunny skies, and I would just think like, I'm just not so excited. And the worst part of it is you should be excited because you're in this beautiful place. If you wake up in Toronto and it's minus 10, then there's a reason, As they say, I think Will Smith or someone said it. I think you could, if you're depressed when you're poor, at least there's something to hope for. But when you're depressed and rich, then what is the next step,
Yeah. You will. Yeah, that is a Will Smith one. That's a good one. But it's true, right? Like a lot of times there's a piece of us that may not be fully honest with ourselves about why we're not happy. Maybe we're not doing something that we know that we just don't want to do, or we're procrastinating, right? Things like that. And part of it is really getting honest with ourselves. Like, am I doing the things that I can be doing to make me happy? Mm-hmm. And a lot of like escaping to a beach and working there. Yeah, you change the environment. And we talked about how the environment impacts our happiness, but the environment isn't the only factor. And so even if you have a beautiful environment, if your thoughts, your actions, your habits are not conducive to happiness, then no sunny beach anywhere in the world is going to change that for you, right?
Yeah. Let's talk about happiness around the world, because it wouldn't be my
Oh,
podcast if
oh.
as much as I just want to talk about happiness because it's such an interesting topic. But talking about happiness around the world, we have the Nordic countries that come up time and time again as the happiest in the world. First of all, do you believe in that research? Obviously, there's research, so it's not just someone came up with this. But do you believe in this research, and do you think that there's a difference between happiness and being content? And do you think the Nordics actually fall into the happiness category or into the content category?
Let's start with just sort of looking at the Nordic countries and why it is that they rank at the top, right? We see that they prioritize social equity, right? Universal health care, education is big. And they actually have high trust societies. And I think that that's an important piece. So, one of the questions that the World Health Organization asks is, if you lost your wallet, how confident are you that you would get it back? And so in the sort of Nordic countries, the Scandinavian countries, they are a lot more trusting that they would get their wallet back versus here in Toronto. Actually, the Toronto Star did a write up a couple of years ago where they left wallets around to see if they could get them back, and they actually got more back than I thought they were going to. But anyway, I digress. So the thing is that when you feel safe and secure and like you belong and like you're supported and your basic needs are met, then that puts you in a position to sort of expand from there, right? Like you're sort of, if you're concerned about healthcare, like you're in the States, right? Or things like you feel like danger or things like that, it definitely detracts from your happiness. So in these countries, we see the things like education, healthcare, social equity that really are drivers of why they're happier.
Mm.
There's also a cultural piece too. And another big piece of this is the social connection that we talked about earlier. What's really interesting was, so in 2008, there was a major financial crisis, right? And Iceland, who sort of fits in with these Nordic countries, right? Iceland as a country essentially went bankrupt, right? Like a very, very stressful time for Iceland. And so researchers were studying their happiness there, and they were really surprised to find that their happiness didn't drop nearly as much as they thought that it would. And this was a
Mhm.
really surprising finding. And so they were like, well, why is that? Like, your country just went bankrupt. And one of the big factors was that Iceland ranks very high in the world in terms of social connection, in terms of having someone that they can go to and rely and trust. And so social connection, it's necessary, but not sufficient for happiness. But without it, it's very difficult to be happy. And so having that social connection can act like a buffer. And I think a lot of these Nordic countries definitely have and prioritize connection more than here in North America, like we were talking about, right? Where it's like on your phone, on your laptop. Like sometimes I'll talk to people in the elevator and people look at me very oddly a lot of the time because they're just not used to someone having a conversation in the elevator, right? Like people think it's weird. So we
Yeah.
live in that type of culture where it's weird to say hi to someone, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. I find that Scandinavians they have very close connections from childhood. At the same time, they're incredibly closed off to foreigners and to new connections because they prioritize the connections they've made over the years. And so um, they would be considered actually very difficult countries for people to make friends in. As I always wondered why, I mean, and it makes sense, the factors that you've listed, that there's a high sense of trust because they trust each other, and that they can count on the country that they live in. I also think, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, but do you think also part of it comes down to the fact that people are happier with less in those countries? Not in the sense that, of course, they have the money, but I feel like in the US and Canada, we have a very action-based culture, a go-get-it culture. Go get that promotion, get more money, get that house, get that car. And I feel like a lot of countries like the Nordic countries or the Netherlands, for example, and also the Netherlands typically makes it somewhere at the top as well, usually, they are happier, with a regular car or, riding their bike, and they work less hours as well. Maybe that could be part of it. And there's just like a less of an expectation to achieve more.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think
Mm-hmm.
about this?
Yeah, and it kind of ties back to what you were talking about before, this idea of contentment, right? What
Mm,
when is enough? Where is peace? And we see that if you look at things like life satisfaction or emotional experiences, social support, trust, freedom, generosity, all of those sort of things with happiness, happiness is sort of this dynamic thing that encompasses joy and excitement, and it's sort of this broader term versus contentment is more about being stable, having sort of satisfaction, having inner peace. They're both crucial, but they're distinct qualities. Um, and I think that the other piece is like we sort of touched on earlier, this idea of collectivist cultures versus individual ones, like here we have in North America. Because in collectivist cultures, so like we were talking about earlier, we see that you see happiness through social harmony or family cohesion or community well-being. And so they see happiness as sort of relational and independent, versus individual cultures like we live here in North America. It's about personal achievement, like I talked about. It's about autonomy. It's about self-expression, self-actualization. And again, it's not that either one is better than the other. It's just they're different, and different cultures look at things different ways. And so whether you want to label it, and often like when people sort of ask me, how do I define happiness? The way we define happiness is it sort of has two components. So there's a cognitive component, right? What we think. We zoom out overall. Do I feel that my life is good? And then there's the emotional, the affect, like AFFECT. How do we feel? So it's how do we feel, right? So being happy in your life with your feelings and being happy with your life overall. And there's two pieces. And that's what really distinguishes happiness. And I think a lot of people confuse what they think happiness is with what it actually is. So a lot of people, when they think of happiness, they think of more that hedonic piece of it, right? The sex, drugs, rock and roll, chocolate cake, whatever, let's go. That's the affective component, right? How do you feel? But there's also this more enduring overall, do I feel like my life is good? Life satisfaction, sometimes they call it. Um, and those two come together. And that's what distinguishes happiness between it versus joy or contentment or something like that, because that's just the affective in the moment thing. But happiness has that plus this additional perspective of overall. Like you could be having a really bad day and still be a happy person, right?
mm.
So it's that broader sense of it with this sort of zoom out life in general versus just the sort of in the moment, how are you feeling?
Yeah, the great point. Do you think it also has to do with this expectations versus reality? And the reason I say this is because I think the reason I think a lot of celebrities are so depressed is, of course, they have it all. Maybe there's less of there's less of anything to work towards, but it's also that they're comparing themselves against each other. They're not comparing themselves against other people like us. Being a digital nomad for some time, I now look at people that go on 1 week vacation as like, oh, but that's so little. Whereas
Mhm.
if I didn't have that lifestyle, I would think that's quite a long time. 2 weeks still, it's not a long time by anyone's standards, but it's decent, but having been at the other end of it, being like, I've been traveling forever. So now this feels unfulfilling to me to go away for 1 week. It doesn't even seem like a vacation because I've lived the other life. And so I imagine someone that has a lot of money, now the expectation is even higher on what their life should be like. What do you think
Yeah.
about this?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And what we know from research is that when we have that social comparison, we tend to compare up to what we don't have, not to what we had 5 years ago, right? And so, it's an interesting cognitive phenomenon that happens. And then the other thing is we fill in a lot of gaps and create a lot of narrative when we do that, right? And so we just see someone with the latest car, the latest purse, or whatever it is. And we assume that because they have that, then they're happy because of it. But what we know from research is that one, as humans, we're not very good at predicting how much happiness that something's going to bring. The term we call it is affective forecasting. So forecasting our affect, trying to predict how we're going to feel. What we know is that say you get the thing, you get the house, you get the job, you get the guy, the car, whatever. One, it doesn't bring you as much happiness as you anticipated that it would. And two, it doesn't last for as long as you think that it would. So that's the other sort of cognitive game that we play here, is that we're projecting all of this stuff and anticipating what's going to happen. And it doesn't bring us as much happiness as we think. There's also this term that's really an interesting concept called hedonic adaptation. And what this means is that as humans, we tend to adapt to things. And it goes both ways, good things and bad things. So the day that you start, like day one of a breakup, life feels insufferable, right? And you just like don't even know how you're going to get out of bed. Then over time, like, and it's so annoying when you're in that place and people are like, just give it time. And you're like, but it's right? But that's true. So what happens is that heartbreak, the pain of the heartbreak, over time, it eases up, right? We start to develop new routines, new habits. Or someone gets a new car. I don't know if you have ever had this happen, or a friend where like they get a new car and like day one, it's like immaculate. And then you go in the car like a month later and there's like coffee cups everywhere, shoes in the back, right? We just kind of get used to it, and then we don't keep this pristine car. So that's hedonic adaptation both ways. We cannot prevent hedonic adaptation from happening. It's a natural process as humans. But what we can do is, in the happiness part, if we want to maximize the most amount of happiness that we can get from something, we can't stop hedonic adaptation from happening. But what we can do is we can slow the slope so that there's more area under the curve, so we overall get more happiness out of it. And a couple ways we can do that is, one, variety. So as humans, we are creatures of habit. It's like most people take the same route to work, same route to the gym, do the same things, right? And so our brain gets used to that, and it's boring. So it doesn't bring us as much happiness. So like I remember, I'm from London, Ontario, and I remember my big goal when I finished my PhD was move to Toronto, right? And so now I live here. And do I go out of my neighborhood very often? No. And yet when I go explore other parts of the city, I'm like, wow, this like Toronto's so amazing, right? And so it's really about making sure that you don't do the same thing in the same place all the time. Variety, and whether that's in terms of food, right? Like how often do we just eat the same thing all the time, right? And or variety in terms of what we're doing or interacting with, all of those things, mixing it up is really important. And even say you get like a picture in your house and you love it, right? When you look at that picture, looking at or focusing on different parts of it to bring variety. So maybe one day you're noticing how the frame matches your couch, and then a different one, how the brush strokes, are done this way, or how like just looking at the same thing from different perspectives can introduce variety. And then the other one that's really big, and this one's harder to do, is the element of surprise. Surprises really can help to slow hedonic adaptation. But the problem with surprises is that you can't plan a surprise, right? Because if you plan a surprise, it's not a surprise. So what you can do, though, is you can put yourself in situations where surprises are more likely to occur, right? Like you, for example, traveling. How many surprises did you come across when you're in different countries, meeting new people, seeing different things, right? As opposed to being the same routine that you do every single day, or really doing those things, taking different paths to work, trying new restaurants, all of those things can really help to sort of slow hedonic adaptation, so we can get the most amount of happiness out of those things.
Yeah, I think it's that I feel more alive and I feel more curious. So when I feel more curious about things, that's when I realize I become happier. You also become a lot more outgoing, and because it's not routine, different parts of your personality start coming out because you're just more surprised by different things. I don't know, as you were talking, it reminded me of the movie, I think it's called In Time. And I don't know if you watched it, but the guy goes back to the past. He's basically able to, he can time travel. And then at the end of that movie, I think you're going to really enjoy it. He gets to live his day twice. The first time he just lives his day, and the second time he lives his day, but he's supposed to notice things around him, and he's supposed to basically all those things that you just listed. And basically he realizes that even the most mundane things can have an element of excitement and surprise. And, he can make a joke, and he can talk to a new person, and he can, so there's ways to make, even because people feel like, oh, but I don't have the money to travel, or I don't have the time to do this and this. What you mentioned is actually quite simple to do on a daily basis. You don't even have to really do a lot. You can just walk a different path, or you can, incorporate little things into your daily life that anybody can do. But a lot of us are sleepwalking. That's, I think,
Yes.
the unfortunate thing. And we miss a lot of the opportunities that we are presented with daily to maybe meet a new person, maybe meet the love of your life, or, so I think that's wonderful advice. Now, going back to, happiness around the world.
Mhm.
Now, my incline when we're talking about countries like the Nordic countries, saying that they're, very happy, is to say, you know, probably countries like Brazil and Mexico should be happier. Look at those people. They're just so happy and alive, and they're social. They have all those elements together. Have you noticed something about those, let's say, countries, like Latin American countries? Have you studied them at all in terms of their levels of happiness?
So they sort of fall mid-range, generally. But what's interesting is that, like when I went to Costa Rica last year, I was in Mexico City, Guadalajara, Rio. It's such a different life than we live here in North America. But like, because I study happiness, I'm constantly looking at things through the lens of that, right? And talking to people. And I think one of the big differences is a lot of people there appreciate what they have. And in North America, we don't seem to see that. It's always want more, bigger, better, shinier, brighter, whatever it is. And it's just such a different mindset to appreciate things, as opposed to be expecting more all the time, you know?
Mhm.
And I also think that another big piece of this is, like, we touched on the social connection, and I think that's really important. But zooming in a little bit in terms of social connection, looking at like friends and family and those sort of things, and whether it's biological family or chosen family, um, you see a lot more tight knit stuff there. Family dinners. Like, when's the last time? Actually, it's a good question. When's the last time I like sat down and had family dinner with anybody? Like Christmas, maybe? Like, we don't really tend to do that here, right? Like, especially I don't know, when's the last time you sat down and had family dinner?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, for sure. It's something that is not common practice here. Um, and I know, and you raised such a wonderful point, because I know, for example, in Mexico and a lot of Latin America, they actually do family dinners every Sunday. So you're never too busy to sit with your family, and it's like they just do nothing. All they do is talk. No one's on their. I don't know if maybe I'm idealizing this, but the purpose is to be present with your family. I don't know if they actually put it in practice, but the point is that they spend time with family, as you said. Yeah.
Yeah, and doing things not on phones, right? Like sitting around. It's such a big piece of it. Like, I remember I was in India for Christmas last year, and on New Year's Day I was in Udaipur, which is in Rajasthan. And we were just kind of like walking the streets, and there's just like people sitting outside, hanging out.
Doing nothing.
and and it was weird to me because I'm just like, what do you mean? And I was with a friend who is from India, and I'm like, what? They're not doing anything. They're just sitting around. And they're like, yeah, they'll just hang out all day, just hanging out. And it was like a weird concept for me to see that, because I don't know the last time I just saw people hanging out, not doing anything. Like, if we're doing something, it's like productivity oriented here, right? We're like doing an activity, or we're going somewhere to do rock climbing or this or that, but just sitting around, like no TV, no this, just hanging out. And I
Yeah,
was,
it's so funny, isn't it, too? Because they don't need some 1 hour yoga, mindfulness, meditation type stuff. Like everything we do here in North America is like, I need to work out. I'm gonna drive to the gym and work out for 1 hour, and then I'm gonna go to work, and then for 1 hour I'm gonna do mindfulness exercise, or you dedicate an hour
yep,
of specifically that activity. Whereas that's their style of life.
yeah.
Mindfulness is in everything.
Yeah. And, I think that a lot, especially here in North America, like self care in particular has become this like glorified thing where it's like eye masks and cucumbers. And it's like, check item off the to do list. Right.
Yeah.
And self care is really important. It's important that we take care of ourselves, right? We can't give what we don't have. We can't pour from an empty cup. But it's a fine line into, are you doing this and actually being present and enjoying it? Or is this just you doing something to tick another item off your to-do list, right? And I get asked a lot, like, if I don't have a lot of time for self-care, what's the best self-care I can do with my limited amount of time? And the answer to that, and all the research really shows that the best self-care is the self-care that you enjoy. So if you enjoy doing jigsaw puzzles like I do, or you enjoy watching funny cat videos on YouTube, or you enjoy, having a bubble bath, whatever it is, it's what you enjoy. The key piece is that you remove the guilt when you participate in it. And that's a lot easier said than done. Like I remember when I was in grad school, I was applying all the things that I was learning about how to boost happiness, right? And so one of the things that I read about was self-care. And I'm like, okay. And there was a massage school close to campus and they did cheap massages because it was the students learning. And I was like, okay, like I'll go there and, student budget works for me. But I felt guilty because grad school guilt is a thing. And I felt like that 1 hour that I took away from doing my schoolwork was like bad. So I felt guilty. So what I did was I took my phone. I'm embarrassed to admit this, but it's true. I took my phone and like how there's like that thing that you put your face in for the massage when you like face down on the table. You know where this is going, right? I started doing emails under the table. And I was like, I had to stop myself because I was like, this is completely defeating the purpose of why you're doing this. You're supposed to be, and we know like productivity isn't linear, right? When you're feeling inspired and engaged, it's very different than like at 5 o'clock when you're tired, right? And so I had to reframe it. And I had to almost like be a scientist with myself where I would say, okay, check in with how you feel before your massage. Check in with you feel after. And I always felt better after, and I was always more productive after. So I almost had to like build up data points to like have this case for myself of like, no, it feels one way right now, but in the end, you're going to be better for it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that whatever the self-care is that people enjoy, it's one of those things where it has so many positive benefits. And especially in a world that's go, 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 and we're taking care of so many other people, to really make that time for ourselves is something that's really important in terms of our happiness.
When you were talking, I was reminding me, I don't know if you're a Friends fan, but there was an episode where Phoebe is like, in an alternate life, she's a workaholic. Yeah. And it just made me think of that. So, going back to, you've done a lot of research on happiness. What is something that you've learned, if there has been anything from around the world that you feel like people should be incorporating more? I think I really love that example of India, just someone just sitting on the street, or, family time. Has there been anything else?
I think one of the things that's been really big for me that we sort of haven't touched on, but I think is really relevant, is this idea of toxic positivity. Because one of the things I see a lot more in North America, but even when I was in Paris last year, like still in Europe, you see it a bit where people just have to like choose happy, be happy, turn that frown upside down kind of mindset. And I think there's a lot of assumptions that that's what happiness is. And so it's one of those things like, when everyone has bad days. I have bad days. You have bad days. You listening, we all have bad days because we're humans. And so it's not about not having bad days, right? It's about, one, you don't want that day to be a slippery slope into weeks or months, right? Because that's when we get into like depression territory, things like that. But we're allowed to have bad days. But then sometimes we'll have a bad day and we won't give ourselves the grace to be human. And instead we'll try to pretend like we're happy, right? We'll go to work and be like, hi, everybody, how's it going? And on those days, we end up feeling more exhausted than if we would have just allowed ourselves to have that day. And the other thing that's really important about this is, so if we're trying to suppress our emotions, emotional suppression is the term we use in research, right? We push them down, try to bottle them away. One, it doesn't work and they don't go away, right? Mm-hmm. And two, what we know is that emotional suppression, trying to suppress our emotions, has an impact on our physical health. Mm-hmm. It increases our odds of all-cause mortality and cancer-related deaths. So this is a big thing. And so I think that part of this happiness conversation anywhere in the world is knowing that we can't be happy all the time. We're humans who have a full range of emotions, and it's normal, healthy, and a good thing to experience the full range of emotions. And that's what makes us human. Can we be happier than we are right now? Absolutely. Can we be happy all the time? Absolutely not. But that's not the point. And so I think that starting to tap in, no matter where you are in the world, or what are those things in my life that bring me joy? What are those things? And learning that for ourselves, and then really trying to incorporate more of that, knowing that it's not easy. And like we talked about, we don't feel like doing it all the time. But it's so important.
Looking at happiness, have you noticed that it's more important to be happy in certain cultures and maybe it's not as important in others?
Yeah, valued. You see it differently. Like in North America, we really value happiness, right? You ask any parent, what do you want for your child when you grow up? What does parents say? I want
Happiness.
my kid to be happy,
Hmm.
right? And what's interesting is there was actually a study done, and parents were asked, like, what do you want for your kids? And they say, we want our kids to be happy, right? Not surprisingly. But then the kids, they wanted to accomplish things so their parents would be proud of them. So the kids are valuing accomplishment, or the students, because that's what they think their parents want. And the parents want them to be happy. And oftentimes this journey of wanting the parents to be accomplished, whether it's, you're going to go to law school or med school or this or that, when you actually ask, are you doing this career path because it makes you happy, or because your parents think it makes you happy, or because it provides some level of financial security or something which you think is then going to make you happy? But you see, like, a lot of people mid-career completely shifting, right? And leaving their law practice or leaving their jobs and doing something completely different. Because a lot of times the compass that we use, especially growing up, in terms of what do I want to do with my life, we're pointing it towards not necessarily happiness. It's money, or it's expectations of others, or it's things like that, right? It's a very different conversation to think about, why are we doing what we're doing, and who are we doing it for? And am I sort of navigating this for happiness or not? Right?
Yeah. Do you think there's a point where people are, and I think you've touched upon this, but is there a point where we're too focused on happiness, where maybe happiness could be a byproduct of maybe doing certain things? So are a lot of us hyper focused on like, am I happy? Am I happy? Am I happy? And is that interfering with us actually being happy?
Yeah, it is. And what we know, and there's research on this, is that people that are hyper focused on their happiness are less happy than other people. And part of it, if you think about it, it really fits in well with our conversation today, where we see that if you're hyper focused on your happiness, what are you not doing? You're not in the present moment, right? Because you're sitting there and you're analyzing it, you're not actually enjoying it. And so that is a big piece of that conversation, right? It's like, if you're constantly in your head analyzing, when is the time to actually enjoy? It doesn't work like that. Like, monitoring, yes, overall, am I happy? Yes or no. But like, if every 5 minutes you're like, am I happy now? Am I happy now? It's like, if you're watching a show, every 5 minutes you're not checking in. Am I laughing? Is it funny? Is it funny? Right? You're actually sitting back, just and taking in the show, and you're enjoying it. And with happiness, we sometimes, especially highly intelligent people, this is particularly difficult because
Mm.
they're so in their head already and analyzing. And it's very difficult to analyze feelings like that, right? It's kind of like love, like words fall short for describing the experience, right? And with
Mm.
happiness, a lot of the times it can be that same way, where it's hard to find words. But if we're sitting there searching all the time and really trying to analyze how we're feeling instead of just actually enjoying how we're feeling, um, that is a pretty safe recipe to unhappiness. Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like it's also that I don't know, I'm gonna go on a bit of a tangent here, but
Yeah.
in North America and in a lot of the developed countries, so there's this cliche that a lot of the poor countries people are happier, and you've done a lot of research on this, so you can definitely say it better than I can. But I think they've looked at like the pyramid of needs, right? So once you're once you're comfortable, you have a safe home or you're fed, then you start thinking, then you can achieve your full potential. But also, brain looks for problems. So when you're at the bottom, you're just making just enough to survive, but you're able to spend some time with your family and really enjoy the very simple things. Your brain is not going towards, but am I happy, in the sense of like, you're not going too far with it, you're just enjoying
Mm-hmm.
the little things that you can get.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas because we already have that covered, we can order Uber Eats, we can watch Netflix, we don't really have to do anything, we don't have to walk to get water. So once all of that is taken care of, then we're sitting here and thinking, but am I really satisfied with my life? Could it be better? you know what do you think about this?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a really good point. Like, even if I think about like, if I was to hit rewind and talk to myself 10 years ago and say, you can get a ride anywhere you want in 1 minute from your phone, or like you don't have to even go to the grocery store for like a very small amount of money. Your food will come directly to your door. If you don't want to cook, you can have your food at your door. You don't have to go anywhere. Like it's so it me back then would have been like, no way, there's no possible way. But that's where we are. And our world has evolved so much. And a lot of it is like our brain hasn't caught up with that. So there's that piece of it, right? And there's also, I think that what's really interesting is that because there's no like end point for happiness, it's like we're constantly chasing. It's like we're almost on this treadmill all the time, right? We're running, doing, because there's no destination, there's no arriving. And so a lot of it is reframing, like I talked about, because there's always going to be more. There's going to be some app coming out next that does something even better, right? That's never going to stop. And so if we're constantly on that like treadmill, then we run, but we actually haven't taken time to enjoy anything that we have, and appreciate those things. The other thought I had on this was that I think it's really interesting how quickly we start to take things for granted, right? We like even at the airport, right? I was in Guadalajara last year. I did a talk at the university, and there's no direct flight to Toronto. So you fly from Pearson to Mexico City and then to Guadalajara. So I'm flying home. I get to the airport in Guadalajara, and there's like tons of people in the airport. And I was like, what's going on? Like, why is this airport so busy? And then I find out that there was a volcano that had been inactive for 30 years and it started ashing. So they were grounding all the planes because the volcano's going to erupt, right? And there were people just livid, screaming at the Air Canada counter about not getting on their flights. And I started thinking, I'm like, oh my goodness, like one, do you want to be in a plane that's flying over an active volcano? Because I certainly don't. Like, I'm happy to be on the ground here because I'm safe. And like, how quickly, like, the fact that we can just fly here, fly there, all these things that we take for granted, right? The fact that we're like in a chair in the sky going somewhere.
Oh,
like,
don't get me started on that.
Like all these things that we just take it for granted. And when things don't go our way, we get mad about it. And I'm like, no, like there's a lot of really great things that I think having more attention and awareness and really appreciating and enjoying those things will go a lot way. Cause like, yeah, we can do a lot of things to be happy. But one of the other things, and I feel like step one is before we start even doing anything, adding anything to our to-do list, step number one is what I say is like, it's not about seeking, like SEEK, going to find happiness. It's about seeing it. It's about noticing the good things that we already have in our life. Like one of the silver linings from the pandemic is like, before the pandemic, because I'm always asking people like, what makes you happy, right? Happiness researcher. And so before the pandemic, a lot of times common responses were things such as, the vacation I just went on, or my new house, or my engagement ring, or whatever. Post pandemic, I hear things more commonly such as hugging my friend, going for coffee, like seeing a movie, going out for dinner, right? A lot of the things that we actually had in our life that did bring happiness, but we kind of took it for granted. We didn't realize it. It wasn't only until it was removed that we realized that, you know what, my one night a week of soccer league really does help my mental health, right? And so appreciating and noticing the good things that we already have in our life, I think is a great place for anyone to start, because you don't have to add anything. You just have to start noticing. And that's a big part of it is noticing and appreciating.
That's such a wonderful point. It's not chasing something. It's first appreciating what you have. And they say once you're more grateful for what you have, it's easier actually to get more things because you're on a different vibration, they say, like different energy. And I think that's a wonderful lesson for anyone. Would you say that's your advice for people if they want to become more happy, is first of all seeing what they have around them that they can be grateful for?
Yeah. To know that no matter how happy or unhappy you're feeling right now, each and every one of us has the capacity to increase our happiness. But it doesn't happen passively. It's an active thing that you need to participate in, right? It doesn't just fall into our lap. Like you don't just wake up in the morning and choose happiness and choose your outfit. It doesn't work like that. We actually have to work at our happiness. Some days we get lucky and a happy thing happens. But if you really want to boost your happiness, to build that muscle, it requires energy and attention and effort. the good news is, just like any behavior change, it's always the most difficult at the beginning, right? And so, yes, we have to work to do those things. And before we start even doing things, we can start to notice the good that we already have. I think that's a great place to start because it allows us to appreciate the things in our life that we maybe were on like autopilot robot and took for granted and didn't realize.
Mm.
And it's great too, because once you start to notice, you start to see like, wow, like I'll get off this chat here and I'll be like, wow, like that was a really fun conversation, right? And just noticing that as opposed to just on to the next, on to the next. But it's like
Mm.
having the awareness to notice the things in your life. It's a really profound thing that doesn't cost anything. It doesn't take a lot of time and it really can be done anywhere. So yeah, I think that's a great place to start.
Thank you for that great advice. And on this point, I think this is a perfect chance to finish the podcast. I could keep talking to you for another hour as a therapist as well. Gillian hears everything that I need fixed. But thank you so much. That was such an interesting conversation. I think a lot of people that are watching or listening to this are going to relate. And guys, if you have any questions for Gillian, please write them below. I don't know if she'll have the time to answer because she's a busy woman, but at least, we'll see what questions come up, and also tell us, how happy do you feel and when do you feel the happiest? I think that's going to be really interesting. Gillian, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It makes me so happy to talk. And your questions were excellent. You're so insightful. The work that you're doing is so important and needed. So I'm grateful that to have spent this time with you today.
Thank you so much, Gillian. And back to you. I think it definitely what you're doing right now is incredibly important in our day and age, especially as a lot of us are struggling with, depression, mental health. And I think it's fascinating for me to actually meet somebody who studies happiness for a living. Like, what a great job you have.
I know.
Once again, thank you and have a happy day.
Thank you. You too.